Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are just about to get started here with a virtual open house where we're going to present the draft of our transportation master plan for your discussion and input. So I'll just start by introducing you to your host today. So as I mentioned, I'm Joanne and I'm the Public Engagement Program Manager with the City of Penticton, and I'll be facilitating the conversation. And with me, I have Avi Thiessen, who is the Regional Manager of Infrastructure and Transportation with WSP, and that's the consulting firm that has helped us develop this plan. We also have a team available to answer your questions from the City of Penticton. We have Ian and Toby, and we have a team of great transportation experts with WSP also on the line to provide support. So today, our goal is to provide you with an update on the plan. The job of this plan is to identify all of the projects needed in the next few decades to improve safety, congestion, and effectiveness of our transportation systems, and to move Penticton towards the vision for a complete transportation approach that's described in our 2019 official community plan. For your information, work on this plan kicked off this past summer with data collection on city roads and intersections, as well as input from the community on where our transportation systems can be improved to make them safe, enjoyable, convenient, and practical. And so today we will provide you with an update on what we learned from these activities, where we think the focus needs to be, and how we plan to prioritize the work as we go forward. And then we want to hear from you on our approach. So just a little bit on how it will work today. So we have a presentation that's about 20 to 25 minutes long. As the presentation proceeds, please feel free to enter your questions in the comment function on Facebook, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. This video will also be available on our Facebook page as well as on Shape Your City following the presentation. And we invite you to formally provide feedback about the transportation master plan draft through our shapeyourcitypenticton.ca website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Avi to lead you through the draft plan.
Thank you, John. I'm just going to share my screen. Right. So thank you again, Joanne. Yeah, so this is the kind of where we're at with the Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan. The presentation today is broken into 4 segments. So the quick introduction that Joanne's already done, and then we're going to give the update as to where the program is and what our next steps are, and then we're going to have some discussion and feedback. So just for context, the IMP, or the Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, it takes off from the official community plan and the guideline that was figured out with consultation with the public on the official community plan. The intent of the Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan is to identify the capital works and prioritize those capital works in order to fulfill the goals of the OCP out to 2045. The work does include 4 different areas, but this presentation is focused on the transportation. And the key areas that we're focused on is safety improvements, the street network capacity issues, and developing out the multimodal network. And this is all done in prioritization in line with the OCP. So for a little bit more context, the official community plan is kind of the overarching document of how the city wants to grow. From that, several other documents or studies will be completed. This one specifically focused on the transportation infrastructure. And in that, we have 4 main areas. So the stormwater, or how we handle major rain events and snowmelts, sanitary sewers, the water, and then the transportation. This program does not result in kind of detailed designs that have the nitty-gritty of what's going on. That's kind of the next phase. So you can see that in the lake-to-lake type project where corridors are selected, and then that goes out for additional public consultation. The intent of the Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan is largely to identify the list of of works that are needed and to prioritize those works. So again, the OCP really lays out where we want to go. As part of the integrated master plan, we've modeled all 4 of those systems, so storm, sanitary, water, as well as transportation, to really understand where we are now. And then in 5, 10, 20, 25-year increments, we've also modeled out the future based on the growth laid out in the OCP to how that would look and what the infrastructure needs to do in order to meet that demand. It's based on the need. Most of those works will be prioritized based on high, medium, low. The other thing that's important to note is that this is a not necessarily a unique approach, but it's a good integration approach where typically the storm, sanitary, and water are all looked at separately, which means that the prioritization is not thought of in conjunction or together. The IMP is really trying to pull them together and prioritize the capital works for the next 20, 25 years based on the OCP together. So what we're doing today is we're going to share the overview of where we are today with capital projects, specifically focused on pedestrian, cycling, and street networks. And then we're going to talk about some public transit, goods movements, and parking. And then what we're asking for from the public is to provide input on the prioritization of the process and also to identify any outstanding issues. So in the OCP, there's a hierarchy that's outlined for movement within the city, with walking, wheelchairs, mobility as the #1 priority, followed by bike, transit, goods movement, and then vehicle movement is actually the lowest priority on that list. This is a little bit atypical from how we were thinking about things in the 90s and the 70s. This is very standard, kind of a standard movement now within most municipalities. But it does kind of change sometimes how we think about cities. So for instance, in the 70s, when the cars were paramount, that's when we saw a lot of highways coming through the downtown, and there wasn't a lot of public realm. So the OCP also calls for a focus on 4 major areas. So the downtown, which is the yellow star, the North Gateway, which is the blue star, the industrial area, which is the black star, and the Skaha Lakes, which is the green star. There's also a call to make better connectivity to the Kettle Valley Rail Trail, as well as also kind of recognizing that we will have congestion and that there are vehicles, and so to deal with that congestion in a prioritized manner. So how this presentation is laid out is each one of these areas, pedestrians, cycling, and vehicles, we're going to be looking at what we've heard to date, what the data says, how we're proposing to prioritize this work, and then some of the high priority locations that have fallen out of that. Then we're also going to look at transit and good movements. So jumping into pedestrians. So during the public engagement during August or the summer, the main issue that was identified was the missing infrastructure. And you can see here the blue map, the map on the right with the blue dots, that's all the missing infrastructure that was identified by the community. Conflicts with pedestrians, so pedestrian conflicts with vehicles, sorry. Pedestrian facilities that require maintenance. And then we also met with an advisory group in the early spring. And from the advisory group, cyclists using the sidewalk in the downtown and lakeshore areas was identified as an issue. This often happens when cyclists don't feel safe to use the road, and they often will get up onto the sidewalk. Pedestrians crossing timing not accounting for elderly residents, or basically the signal timing out while people are still in the crosswalk. Unsafe pedestrian and cycling accommodations on rural roads. And that's primarily the Naramata area as well as the Lakeside Road. So what we used as kind of the backup or the additional investigation, so there's the subdivision bylaw, which calls for sidewalks at least on one side of the road. The sidewalk priority plan, the city already has a sidewalk priority plan. This is actually a very well-developed plan. They've gone out and done a lot of investigation as to the missing gaps in the network. The Parks Recreation Plan, the idea there is to connect through parks with trails, but also to connect parks to lakes, mountains, and the community plan. So you can see here from the existing data that the city has collected, the map on the right is the missing links on the pedestrian side. How we are proposing to prioritize this work is locations that are pedestrian and vehicle collision hotspots. So that's primarily focusing on safety. Proactive focus on infill growth areas. The OCP called for significant growth, specifically in the downtown. We want to make sure that those people can get around there safely. Known pedestrian generators, so that's basically just places where people want to be and come from. So parks, schools, shopping, employment, community centers, recreation centers, and transit. Prioritizing vulnerable users, so sidewalks around senior centers, schools, and then anywhere that's a generator for mobility restricted people, such as hospitals. Gaps in sidewalk network according to bylaw, so that's just anywhere that there's a gap, specifically relating to development. Roadway volumes classification percentage of heavy vehicles. Essentially, the higher the volume of traffic on a road and the higher the volume of trucks on that road, the less safe pedestrians feel. And so we want to make sure that the pedestrians have the place to walk there. And then obviously also areas that just need to be replaced due to maintenance issues. So I'm not going to go through this list, but through the process that we've gone through, these are the locations that have been identified as the high priority gaps in the pedestrian network or the sidewalk network. Moving on to cyclists. So again, from the public engagement over the summer, lack of proper cycling infrastructure, mainly bike lanes and signals, was identified as the top priority. Conflicts between cyclists and vehicles, traffic, speeding, conflicts with parked cars. And you can see again here on the map on the right, all the yellow dots are the locations where these types of issues were identified. From the advisory group, the top issues were establish Penticton as a cycling hub for tourism, add a bike facility on Lakeside Road, reevaluate the bike route on Carmine Ave versus Duncan Ave, improve bike parking at transit stops, add bike repair areas along Kettle Valley Rail Trail, adjust regulations for micromobilities such as motorized scooters and e-bikes. In the last several years, we've definitely seen an increase in e-bikes and motorized scooters. These are starting to go on to multi-use trails now, which is causing a little bit of safety concern, particularly where there's a high volume of small children. So what were the documents that we used to guide this? So Penticton in 2006 engaged in a transportation master plan. The cycling component of that was updated in 2012. And this project kind of took the update in 2012 and has continued to work on trying to build out the cycling network, as well as bringing it up to Ministry of Transportation standards. And the lake-to-lake cycling route was identified as kind of a high priority, which is already underway. So how was cycling priority proposed? So update using the active transportation mode guides from the ministry. Prioritized cycling infrastructure that improves and addresses safety. Construct routes that connect to key destinations in the infill growth areas such as schools, Okanagan College, employment centers, major retail, downtown, parks, and beaches. Construct the lake-to-lake bike route, which again is already underway. Improve street connections to major trails. And you can see here, this is the existing bike network that has already been identified. Or sorry, that's the bike network that is proposed, and some of those routes are already completed. So here are the high priority projects that are based on the cycling network. Again, I'm not going to go through this list, but it will be available as part of the presentation. So when it comes to streets and traffic safety specifically, what we heard from the public during the public engagement is that there are a number of inadequate or unsafe intersections. Speeding was highlighted as an issue. Sight lines and blind corners were identified. Pedestrian vehicle conflicts with parked cars, issues around driveways on busy roads, and traffic congestion. Again, the map on the right, all the red dots are the locations that were identified by the community as potential issues. From the advisory group, we heard that speeding was an issue, need for safe pedestrian crossings on collectors, sightline issues, specifically on Smythe Drive, desire for traffic calming on Lakeside Road. So what we use as our background data, there's a data set from ICBC, that's a 2014 to 2018 collisions over that period. You can see here on the map on the right, in the dark gray, those are the higher frequency collision locations where there's more than 8 during that 4-year period. And the lighter gray is the where there's less than 8 collisions in those locations. And you probably can't see it, but as part of this data set, we also overlaid all the locations that were identified by the community. So there were 2 kind of major areas that were identified as safety issues from a collision perspective. One was the highway, where there was 2 main collision types. One is the right-hand turning vehicle, so that's where people are typically entering onto the highway. They're looking left to look for a gap in the traffic, and they end up rear-ending the vehicle in front of them who hasn't proceeded forward onto the highway. The more higher issue collisions are the ones where they're turning left and they're colliding with through vehicles and head-on collisions. The other corridor that had a number of collisions along it was Main Street, Martin Street, and Winnipeg Street. So that's the major north-south arterial connector. What we saw on this road was that there was actually quite a bit of red light running and people misjudging the oncoming traffic gaps, as well as not really understanding what people were doing when it came to their intentions with regards to turning. So that's people not signaling while turning left or right, and the person behind them hitting them, or an oncoming accident. As this data set is only going out to 2018, there has been some work by the city on specifically Eckhart Avenue. So some of these issues already have been addressed by the city, which was not captured in this data set. And we were able to, there was definitely confirmed speeding on Naramata as well as Lakeside. However, when it comes to crash data, there's the primary location for collisions was the highway with 450 collisions over that 4-year period. Lakeside actually only had 5 over that reported period. So with regards to capacity issues, the model looked at 144 intersections. Based on the current 2020 volumes, there's 50 intersections that need improvements. When we projected that out to 2045, there's an additional 27 intersections that need improvement. A lot of these are reasonably minor, such as increasing capacity at the left-hand turn or signalization changes. This does not take into account any mode shift. So, and what I mean by mode shift is part of the OCP's plan for the community of Penticton is to get more people onto bikes and more people onto transit. Sometimes when we do this in communities where there is a lot of ridership on buses or a lot of bikes, we can look at a continued trend in the modeling. This is kind of the worst case scenario where the same number of people who are currently driving continue to drive on the network. And we just use background growth for that. So how do we prioritize capital projects? Our main concern here is safety. So again, any project that has a safety concern would be the highest priority. Sidewalk and cycling projects would then be prioritized, as well as other infrastructure. So coordination with the storm, sanitary, and water projects. So here's the list of the kind of the short-term capacity, which means that the locations which have capacity issues over the next 5 to 10 years. We also looked at safety and traffic calming. This part of the work is not done yet, but on the left-hand side here, you can see the study areas that are currently being focused on, and on the right, it's the potential calming measures. So these are not recommended at this time. They're just simply what we're looking at doing and to see if that would have any improvement overall. So public transit, goods movements, and parking. Unfortunately, Transit had been planning to update their transit future study, which was originally from 2015. That got postponed due to COVID and only restarted late this fall. So we were not able to coordinate this project with that work. However, that will be done once that work is completed and handed off between BC Transit and the City of Penticton. For goods movement, the existing 3 classifications of truck routes in the city is a little bit confusing, I think, for truckers. Our recommendations in the report are going to be to simplify that, and we're going to be recommending some best practices to hopefully give a little bit more clarity to truckers, as well as make it easier for enforcement. With regards to parking, we did go through kind of all the existing data. There was also a recent, council did recently look at this and approve parking rates increase in downtown parking areas that are paid parking, and as well as potentially looking at some paid parking for residential areas. As this stuff is new and as collecting data during COVID was probably not a good situation or would not give us good data, the recommendation is to kind of move forward with a more comprehensive study, especially once the results of increasing the cost of parking in the downtown are understood. It's a very standard way of managing storefront parking is with parking rates. Most downtown areas, the idea is that you want about 85% of your parking full at any given time. And the way that's managed is through parking rates. So once this is more kind of, once COVID's over and things return to normal a little bit more, the recommendation is to continue to look at this, collect more data, look at potential implementation of electric vehicles, parking and charging, what parking requirements are needed, and then also car sharing. So how does this work in the overall picture? So we're currently looking at the pedestrian, cycling, and capacity issues in the city. These are all going to be prioritized within a safety lens. There are locations that we're looking at specifically for safety, but they're all going to be weighted within that to create a transportation priority locations. Those locations are then going to be taken and combined with the stormwater, sanitary, and water projects. Again, we weight them based on the outlines in the OCP, and that's going to create the overall integrated infrastructure project list, which will be kind of rolled out early January and presented to council. So the next steps are to incorporate feedback, finalize the capital project list and priorities, and finalize our report. So I think with that, Joanne, I don't know if you want me to hand it over back to you.
Actually, just keep your screen up, Avi, in case you want to refer to any slides there.
Sure.
So one of the hot topics that we've had in the community and that was kind of referenced on our Facebook Live is this idea of having a parkade downtown. I know you mentioned in there about recommendation for more parking studies. Do you have any comments on that question?
Erin, would you be able to comment on that?
Sure thing. We referenced a background report that had been provided by the city, which looked at the feasibility of a parkade downtown. And from a cost perspective, it looked like there were still questions on the table after that report was completed. So that was part of what led us to recommending a further comprehensive look at parking in Penticton, and within that comprehensive look, really identifying what the goals for parking in downtown are, and then using that to structure an analysis of whether a parkade would be desirable or feasible.
Thanks, Erin. So we're not getting a ton of questions online, and so what I want to offer for people who are watching is that you are invited to go to shapeyourcitypenticton.ca. On shapeyourcitypenticton.ca, you can see this full presentation that will give you the opportunity to look at the tables and the charts in greater detail. There is a feedback form on there. So if you have any questions about any of the projects that are being considered to improve the pedestrian, the cycling, and the vehicle network, works. You can ask your questions or provide your comments on the feedback form. You can also ask questions in the forum on the website, and you can also email staff at getconnected@penticton.ca. If you're interested, we do have 2 additional workshops coming up early next week, and you can register for those through Shape Your City. And we will be continuing to consult with a range of stakeholder groups on the recommendations in this plan to ensure that we fully vet what is being considered. And so with that, I'll wrap up today's Facebook Live and thank everyone who has participated today. Have a good afternoon.